500 miles north of Scotland on the edge of the Arctic. Everyday life for its 200,000 people is hard. This inhospitable environment has forced on the Icelanders a self-reliance and bred in them a fierce independence that sometimes blurs into insularity. This, as much as anything, has motivated a tiny population to confront an overwhelmingly superior power. Huge expanses are completely uninhabitable. Beneath the snow lies unstable volcanic rock, mountains or vast glaciers. Only on coastal strips do the Icelanders cultivate the usable 1% of their island. Even there, the animals they farm need to share the Icelanders' own characteristic hardiness. But the only benefit from living on an active volcano is an endless supply of boiling water which heats the whole of the capital, Reykjavik, including its open-air swimming pools. Iceland has also harnessed its cold water resources to provide an abundance of hydroelectric power. It's hydroelectricity which powers this aluminium smelter, Iceland's largest industrial plant, and the only major investment in which foreign capital has been allowed. Other nations, particularly Britain, have harvested the same offshore fishing grounds. This dependence on fishing has inevitably made Iceland vulnerable. Her whole economy, and in particular her foreign exchange, are based on the sale of fish or fish products. Of Iceland's export earnings, 3% comes from agriculture, 7% from industry and other products, 15% from that one aluminium smelter, and the overwhelming balance from fish products. The cod accounts for over half of these fish products. For Iceland to lose her earnings from cod would be comparable to Britain losing her revenue from cars, lorries, Scotch whisky, aircraft, and most capital goods. It's an unthinkable prospect. Looking back, many Icelanders consider previous fishing agreements signed with the British to have been as damaging to their economy as the giving away by Britain of a large slice of her rights in North Sea oil. Until last October, Britain was allowed by agreement to take 130,000 tons a year from the rich grounds within 50 miles of the Icelandic coast. In 1958, the Icelanders unilaterally extended their fishing limit to 12 miles in a bid to control their own fishing resources. In 1972, again without international legal backing, they increased this to 50 miles. Finally, last year, they pushed the limit out to 200 miles. Every new limit has brought conflict with the British. The most significant protests have been made at the most conspicuous target for anti-foreign feeling, NATO's Icelandic Defence Force base at Keflavik, 30 miles from the capital. It's manned by 6,000 Americans and is of the greatest strategic significance in the NATO defense chain. From here, aircraft packed with electronics keep constant watch on Russian air and submarine movements. It was to NATO that Iceland expressed her bitterest complaints about British aggression, and it was fear that she might shut the base that led to the crucial intervention last week of NATO Council in the Cod War. Editor of Morgunblaðið, Iceland's most powerful newspaper and a firm government supporter, is Skirmir Gunnarsson.
Whatever tonnage we give to the British will be taken from Iceland, and 230,000 tons is what we have been taking ourselves in the last few years. If we give you 80,000 tons or 100,000 tons, we ourselves face economic disaster immediately, and if we give you 100,000 tons and continue our self-fishing 230,000 tons, we face disaster in 1979 or 1918. This is our main problem. We would like to be fair towards the British fishermen, but we simply cannot. We lost the herring 10 years ago, and we are facing the fact that we may lose the cod in 3 or 4 years. And this is no propaganda. We will simply have to move out of this country if we lose the cod. And the British are under naval force taking this livelihood from this nation.
Do you think the British government fully understands the conservation message you've been trying to put across?
I don't. I think they don't give a damn. I think they simply don't care. They have their problems. We have ours, and I don't think they care at all. The British government's attitude, or Mr. Hattersley's attitude in the negotiating rounds which were taking place in September, October and November was such that nobody in Iceland can understand the British government's attitude. Mr. Hattersley was arrogant. He was coming to Iceland saying, well, we have this agreement and we want this agreement again and we want more. And he was asked, well, aren't you prepared to go down from 130,000 tons? And he said, no, what are your proposals? I mean, he was coming to us asking for fish. We were not coming to him asking for something. I don't think you should send Mr. Hattersley again to Iceland.
But it was British arrogance at sea rather than at the conference table which led to an Icelandic ultimatum. Even before Dr. Lunds could meet the British, the Icelandic Prime Minister, Geir Hallgrímsson, called a press conference.
Diplomatic relations with Great Britain would be severed, taking force about a week from now, if there at that time still are British naval vessels in Icelandic waters within the 200 miles fishery zone. It is the decision of the British government that ultimately will decide if the severance will come into force or not.
The Morgenbladet leader goes on to say that political opponents are using the fishery dispute to drive a wedge between Iceland and NATO. They're using British aggression to support their case.
The next day's unanimous press support for the Prime Minister was phlegmatically conveyed to the Foreign Office by British Ambassador Kenneth East. No one could later argue that Britain had not been warned.
The prospects are now clear. There will be a diplomatic breach next week unless the frigates are called off the banks within that time.
Away from the diplomatic formalities, the ultimatum last weekend only sharpened Icelanders' determination to defend one of the highest living standards in Europe. As the people at this party told me, it's a standard that could be destroyed by 1 year's unregulated cod fishing.
I think the newsmen tend to describe the hectic things, you know, the collisions on the high sea. That's not the main point. The main point is a question of fish. It's a question of economic interests. Every ton that the British fish here on the Icelandic fishing grounds have direct influence on the Icelandic economy because we are so dependent on fish. This is why this case is so dear to us, so important.
It's so important that it is worth cutting off diplomatic relations for. It is worth having gunboats in conflict with frigates. It's worth all that.
Oh yes, because I cannot think of any other case who could be as important to us.
Would you be in favour of offering nothing at all to the British?
Yes.
You think they should get out completely?
I realize that this must be very difficult, but I think that the British should have started preparing to get out in 1973. They knew pretty well at that time what the situation was. They must have realized that there isn't enough for everybody in Icelandic waters. They should have made preparations to leave Iceland in 1973. We have now reached the sad state where there isn't enough for everybody. There isn't enough for us, for the Icelanders, whose property, whose fishing grounds these are. And anybody who looks at this problem must realize that these are our fishing grounds. This is a part of Iceland. This is the only natural resource that we have. This is what has kept Iceland going for whatever it is, 1100 years.
It's also kept places like Hull and Grimsby and Fleetwood going for
Yes, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I lived in England for 7 years, in Manchester. I realize how serious unemployment is. I think it's one of the most terrible situations any person can be put into. But please don't come to us to alleviate your unemployment situation.
On Monday, the day when Mr. Callaghan was due to meet Dr. Luntz in Brussels, Iceland's 8 cabinet members made their way to the Prime Minister's office in the centre of Reykjavik. Before them were reports laying the blame on the frigate Leander for the most recent ramming of the gunboat Thor. They decided, as the Prime Minister had predicted at his press conference, to give Britain 5 days to withdraw the Navy or diplomatic relations would be cut. This ultimatum caused something of an embarrassment in Brussels, where Mr. Callaghan was informing Dr. Luntz of his decision to withdraw the Navy anyway. But opposition politicians in Iceland are themselves putting pressure on a government they already accuse of being too soft. Jonas Arnason, MP.
Long ago we should have declared that we would break all diplomatic relations, long ago.
Well, now what would that achieve?
That would achieve, first of all, that people would be taking us really seriously.
But wouldn't it make it that much harder to reach some kind of reconciliation?
No.
Why not?
Well, reconciliation, are you speaking of us allowing them to fish 65,000 tons?
Well, there has to be some sort of deal done sometime, doesn't there?
Well, the only the deal that we could say that we could accept, when you look at the situation up here, as far as the fish stocks are concerned, is that they shouldn't be allowed to fish a single cod.